So just ask the Secretary, what's his understanding of the current inflation rate just now? What's the average inflation rate been across the UK this year?
That's for you.
Well, inflation is down to below 5%, 4.7%. It was at a high of 11.4%. And I can tell you it's the same in Germany and Australia.
Okay,
it's not a UK issue.
So we've had stuff about the Scottish budget, so we just heard there inflation is now down to 5% from that high of 11%. When we look at the block grant, so 23-24 block grant is 36.9 billion, and then 24-25 it's 37.4 billion. So that's an increase of 1.4%. So quite clearly 1.4% is way below the current 5% inflation. So that's a real terms cut, isn't it, to the Scottish block grant?
So inflation works across the whole United Kingdom. So there's no one particular part isolated from inflation. Okay, the budget that we set at 41 billion is a record budget. You take the Barnett consequentials that come through, that's an extra billion. And the Welsh Government themselves said that when they looked at the numbers given, it's an extra 15 billion euro on average.
Well,
it works out at 8.5 for Scotland.
Budget, it only goes up 1.4% next year, so that's a real terms cut, isn't it? That's undeniable compared to inflation rate.
If you then take the Barnett consequentials, they alleviate. We've then cut inflation is now down below.
Barnett's a one-off non-recurrent, and the Barnett next year is only 0.6%. So even account for Barnett, the budget only goes up 2%.
And in the meantime, we've looked after the most vulnerable people in our society. Our pensions have gone up in line with inflation at the 10% rate. Universal benefits gone up in line with inflation.
Just answer the question and confirm.
The minimum wage has gone up.
2% increase in the budget, it still represents a real terms cut. That's just a fact, isn't it?
The reality is that all the budgets are going through the same process, and the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government and the Irish Government get £120 spent on them in devolved administrations versus £100 in England. It's a very generous settlement.
It's a real terms cut. The scrutiny unit, when they analysed spending the block grant allocations since 2010, they've actually confirmed that it's now a 17% real terms cut compared to 2010. So you might be factually correct when you talk about a record settlement, but the reality is that record settlement, because clearly if a budget increases, you're always going to hit a new record settlement, but it's a 17% real terms cut since 2010. So isn't that putting pressure on the Scottish Government?
Scottish Government spending in the last 5 years has gone from 40 billion to 56 billion. That's an increase of 7% per annum. That is not austerity.
So a 17% real terms cut, that's from the scrutiny unit. You're saying that's not austerity?
I'm saying 7% increase in the budget over the last 5 years, when in the previous 4 years there was no inflation, zero inflation. 7% per annum is the most generous funding settlement in the UK. That is not austerity.
So you're saying 17% cut since 2010 in real terms isn't austerity? It's quite clear.
I'm saying that it's quite clear that in the funding round there's been no austerity in Scotland. There's been a generous funding.
It's a real terms cut. I mean, I've gave you the figures. So that's a fact. It's a real terms cut. But if we move on, we look at the capital grant. The capital grant is going to decrease from 6.2 billion down to 5.6 billion. That's a 10% cut. So why is there a 10% cut to the capital expenditure budget given to the Scottish Government?
The capital, that is done in the round. It's done in the fiscal framework. It's done on an overall basis. In the meantime, the borrowing limits have been maintained for Scotland.
Why the cut?
The cut on the capital grant, I'm not aware of the detail of that. We'll get into I'm very happy to get into the detail of that with you offline.
Well, we'll write to you.
Right to me, explain it.
We'll write to you because you're going through detail. You're quoting something scrutiny. Did you call it?
Scrutiny unit. Yeah.
Scrutiny unit. Who are they?
It's a part.
It's a what?
Part of the parliamentary process. So you should know who the scrutiny unit is.
The scrutiny unit have given you figures.
Yep.
Okay. Well, if you supply them to us, we will analyse them because the figures we have for Her Majesty's Treasury say that the current block grant of 41.6 billion is in real terms the highest since devolution began. So we will
We've covered that because I've
No,
pointed out as a
you're
real
not
terms
liking
cut.
you're not liking
But
the
I'd-
answer.
I'd
But
like to move on,
you've
sir.
cherry-picked, Alan, let's be clear, you've cherry-picked 2010. Our figures that we quoted that you were contradicting are since 1999. So and as Lord Orford said, we've just been through a period of no inflation for a number of years. So let's get you the accurate figures as quoted by the Treasury.
So let's do that and we'll move on now, if that's okay,
Well,
Secretary.
you can, but I'm just trying to put a balance in. That's all.
It's quite often described, the Scottish Parliament is described as the most powerful devolved Parliament in the world. Do you still think that's the case?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Northern Ireland, welfare is devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly, energy policy is devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly, and civil service is devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly. So, quite clearly, the Northern Ireland Assembly has got more powers than the Scottish Parliament. So, how can the Scottish Parliament be deemed the most powerful devolved Parliament in the world?
Well, there's a number of, I think it was 13 welfare benefits that were planned to be sent to the Scottish Government. I think only 3 of them have been implemented so far.
Why is
there's been plenty of ability.
Why is full devolution of welfare to Northern Ireland good enough for Northern Ireland but not good enough for the Scottish Parliament? Why is the energy policy devolved to Northern Ireland but not to the Scottish Parliament? Why is that?
That is the settlement that is agreed with the United Kingdom. Energy is a devolved matter. We're on one island. We work in one geography, and we have to solve the energy crisis together.
And Northern Ireland, obviously, there's a relationship between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, which is not part of the United Kingdom. So that explains that part. But it is still the most powerful Parliament. The Scottish Parliament has more powers than in the round collectively than any of the other devolved legislatures. And for instance, the police in Wales is still reserved to the UK government. The police in Scotland is devolved. I mean, there are many things that are devolved to the Scottish Parliament that aren't fully devolved to Wales. So you're just cherry-picking things that suit your argument. But I think you know that the Scottish Parliament has got enormous powers and not least tax-bearing powers.
Look further afield, like in Canada, some of the Canadian provinces have got their own immigration policy. So why couldn't Scotland have its own immigration policy?
Because we are one United Kingdom. We're one United Kingdom. We need a central policy on key matters, whether it's foreign affairs, whether it's energy, whether it's constitution, whether it's immigration. We're joined on one island. We cannot have differentiating policies on immigration.
You can trust the Scottish Parliament to have a different policy.
It's common sense.
What we're trying to do is not have an economic border within the United Kingdom. That's why immigration is reserved.
Previously, there's a fresh talent scheme. Well, obviously, that was under a Labour government, but that managed to operate a separate immigration policy for Scotland, and that worked. So why can't something like that be looked at again?
We believe. You know very well the UK government's position. We believe that immigration should be reserved, and we should have one policy across the United Kingdom, and we're very clear about that. And I know it's something that isn't necessarily popular with the Scottish government, but it's something we believe is important. And we have mitigating factors like the seasonal agricultural workers scheme, which works very well for the whole of the UK. This office took it from 2,500 to 30,000 people. It's now increased since then. It does the job it's meant to do. It works on a UK-wide basis. Those people arrive in the Scilly Isles in February, March to pick daffodils, and they're picking fruit later in the year in Scotland, and they do other things on the way, and it's a lot of the same people moving across the country as seasonal agricultural workers before they then return.
Okay, we'll move on. We'll move on from that.
Okay.
Couple of energy matters. So I've been asking about a cap and floor revenue mechanism for pumped storage hydro for a number of years now. There's 2 schemes in Scotland that are ready to go. The private investment's there. All that's needed is this trading mechanism. Now, I believe there's maybe going to be another consultation, but why is this taking so long, and why doesn't the government just go on with it so we can get the pumped storage hydro up and running in Scotland with these new projects?
Lawrence. This Cruachan you're talking about, and
you've got Cruachan extension, and you've got Corrie Glass, which would be a new scheme.
Yep.
No, I mean, just to say, I think that the government recognises the potential and the importance and is committed to having a framework in place by 2024. So we're still committed to that.
But I mean, I would add that this office is amongst, we do believe they are good schemes, and we have pressed the case for that, but they are going through the consultation process, and I believe they're both excellent schemes that will be enabled.
I mean, I'd benefit of visiting Crooken during the summer, so I fully recognise the importance to Scotland. But
and you know how keen they are to get up and running, and it's this lack of a mechanism that's holding things back. Look at another aspect of energy. So obviously the tenuous charges where Scotland's at a disadvantage by having to pay much higher grid connection fees. Yeah. So that does put Scottish projects at a disadvantage.
The Scottish consumers get the benefit of equal pricing. There's two sides of the same coin, right?
I'm going to come to my point though. Yeah. So industry has started raising concerns that looking forward, they think that to connect the north of Scotland is going to be £20 per megawatt hour additional cost. Now that quite clearly means Scottish projects cannot therefore be competitive with ones further south, which actually then means consumers right across Great Britain are not going to get access to the lowest, cheapest forms of electricity generation. So what are you going to do about the possible impact of these charges?
So I'll answer that. I mean, as you will know, Mr Brown, Ofgem are carrying out a review of this area. We expect to hear results of that in 2025. But myself and Minister Bowie, the Energy Minister, recently chaired a joint meeting with the industry and Ofgem just to hear at first hand from them what their concerns are. And we're going to have another meeting in the new year. We've tasked Ofgem and others with various action points, and we hope to hear back in terms of how we might be able to address some of these concerns. But I mean, it is an Ofgem, matter.
Yeah, but government can't just wash their hands of it if it's going to disadvantage Scottish.
But the Chancellor said in his autumn statement, this is going to be a major area, Ofgem, and we've had meetings. I've attended the Islands Forum, the first one, which was in Orkney, and we had Ofgem on the line with the whole community there. And what's happening here as part of the transition is we need to redesign our grid system from when it used to be based on coal-fired power stations in Scunthorpe to now renewable energy in Orkney and Shetland and Kincardine. So this is part of the transition. Ofgem have to redesign the grid system. There's a huge amount of money being allocated to that.
Well, it's not Ofgem that designs the grid system, but in one other energy aspect. So post-Brexit, Energy UK estimated that the new trading arrangements for electricity is adding £1 billion a year to our electricity bills. So during a cost of living crisis, why does the government think that's acceptable for £1 billion to be added to our bills?
We don't accept that analysis. I mean, this government's put in a huge amount of support to help households and businesses with the...
Was Energy UK wrong?
Energy.
What do you think the additional costs are, the post-Brexit trading arrangement?
Well, Brexit gets blamed for all sorts of things, and the SNP are the first to point at Brexit for a whole catalogue of things. What this government is doing, what this government is doing is supporting households and businesses with the extra costs of energy. And I know from my constituents that's been a very welcome intervention, and we continue to support the most vulnerable households.
Will you write to the committee and explain what your assessment of the additional costs are post?
Mr Brown, Brexit gets blamed for all sorts of things.
It's a fact that the trading arrangements for electricity have changed and it adds costs. So I'm asking if you could write to the committee and confirm what that additional cost is.
As I say, Brexit gets blamed for many things.
I think it was a request to get some correspondence. I'm sure we'll get that for Mr Brown's satisfaction.